Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephen. Today I'm doing another Q&A with questions that have been sent in by you. Okay, let's get through some of the questions, some of the short ones at the beginning. The first question was nitty-gritty question for traditional publishers. Who controls your Amazon page? Is it the author or the publisher? It's me. If I want to go in and I want to make changes to the biography, I do that. In terms of books that are on there, Amazon controls their own thing. If a book is one of yours and it hasn't popped up, you can kind of appeal to them and say, can you do this? They also link through to your social media, your Twitter usually. There again, you have to enter that in and then it connects it automatically and does it for you. The other question someone else had was, which linked to this, is who controls your Goodreads page? It's also the author there again. You can go in and say that book isn't right, or the text isn't right, or the cover isn't right, and you can appeal to Goodreads, which of course is now owned by Amazon, and they will make changes for you, but you have to do that. There's a sort of blog option on Goodreads. I don't know if anybody reads it. Occasionally I post stuff on my page. I do my own reviews on there for books that I'm reading, but mostly it's just there for me to keep track of whatever I'm working on or whatever I'm looking at the moment. But I don't use it to promote stuff, but some people do, and some people do giveaways. Occasionally I've done them on the past on my Goodreads page. There again, it's down to you, it's down to the author to manage it. The next question is to do with contracts with traditional publishing. Somebody said, how do contract deadlines work? I've heard the advice that you write, it takes however long it takes to write a good book, but what do publishers feel about that? So, with traditional publishing, when you get a contract, what will typically happen is it will have a deadline on it. If this is your debut, you'd obviously have to have finished the first book and you've given them a draft that you've worked on potentially with your agent, or your agent has given you notes, you revised it, and once they've said it's happy, they then submit it to publishers on your behalf. You'll go through the contract and it'll have a date set in the contract that will say you need to have the version of the book that's so many revisions by this date. You need to have the finished version by this date, and it will state it very clearly. This is so that they know once the book reaches a certain stage, it then goes into the kind of traditional publishing machine. It'll be edited, it'll be proofread, it'll have, all these things done that take months to do at various stages. Once it goes into kind of the cycle, and they know that based upon the date you've handed it in and the date it's gone through all these revision stages, it can then be published and go out to shelves, bookshops on this date. However, you also then need to work backwards from that date to say, if we're doing advanced reading copies and review copies, we need to send them out on this date to build up PR. So there's a lot of kind of things that go into the process of working out when the book will come out. Also, what else is coming out around the same time from that publisher? We don't want two books that are too similar because they could potentially confuse readers, could potentially cannibalize sales, which I've talked about in the past. If it's in terms of deadlines, if you've got multiple books, then it gets a little bit trickier. Say you get a contract with a traditional publisher for a trilogy. You would have finished that first book, that's what they're buying, and you'll give them some notes on 2 and 3. Once you've started going through that cycle and the editing process on book 1, you obviously then have to start writing book 2. And in your contract, it will say, book 1, let's just call it, The Chalice, is this date, you have to have edited it to a certain stage by this date, and it'll say, The Chalice, or here after referred to in the contract as book 2, it'll have a deadline of when you have to have handed it in again, a first draft, edits, proofread, so that the book can come out. The dates are fairly solid. Now yes, some authors, a few, have missed their deadlines and they've extended them again and again and again, and some of the really big popular authors that you all know about, that I don't need to name, have missed their deadlines by years. However, when that book comes out, it will sell, therefore the publishers are not too worried. Obviously they'd like them sooner, but they aren't there. But for the rest of us, missing your deadline is not really a good thing, because of what I've just talked about, in case of having to work backwards from when the book hits the shelves, all the other things you want to get in the line so that you can promote the book so that it has the best chance of reaching the maximum number of potential readers, and the sales will do well within that first period so that it gains more attention to get more sales and so on. If you're struggling and you're an author, traditional published author with a series, and you're struggling with your book and you have conversations with your editor and they know about it, then they can be more forgiving. They will talk to you about it. You shouldn't ever spring it on them though. That's the kind of the other side of it. If you're in constant conversation with your author every couple of weeks or every couple of months, you're checking in, and if you're 6 months out from when you're supposed to hand your book in and you sort of say to them, I'm really struggling, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it, they might say, right, well, I can give you an extra couple of months and we can potentially make it now 8 months. Come back to me in 2 months' time and we'll see how you're getting on. And if you think you can then do it in 8 months instead of 6. And if you go back to them after 2 months and say, yeah, I'm still having various problems, it could be health problems, it could be mental health, it could be family, it could be work commitments that's pushing you and you don't have time to write, it could be you've got writer's block, whatever it might be, you stay in communication with your agent and with your editor and you talk it through. And they might say, okay, right, we're going to move that deadline and we're going to push the book back by 6 months, 8 months, a year to give you more time to work on it. And as long as you're in constant communication with your publisher, as long as you talk it through with them, that's fine. The downsides are, for the readers, that as a reader yourself, if a book in a series comes out one a year, you might forget about it. There's so many other books, there's so many other things coming out, and remembering to pre-order that book and to remember that's when it's coming out is really difficult. So potentially by delaying a book, it could damage your sales, particularly if it's in a series. Some people will pick up the first book and sales on a second book in a series usually tail off in traditional publishing and then tail off into the third. Some people obviously will buy all three, but some people are always willing to give new series from an author they know or from an author they don't know a chance. And if they like it and they want to go and pick up the second one, they find out it's not coming out for 2 years, they may just completely forget because you're an unknown to them, and that can really damage your sales. The toughest thing for me when I became a traditionally published author was that adjustment, to know that it may have taken me 3 or 4 years to get the book ready to the place where my agent and me then took it to the publisher, and once they said yes, I then had to replicate everything I've done in a year and do it again and do it again and do it again. And in theory, with every book that you write and with more practice that you do, the better you will get, and your books will get better, and you understand the editing process better of being in traditional publishing, so you know what's required of you and you know when it's required that you do it. However, it can start to feel like a work, and it can start to feel like a chore if you're not enjoying the process, if you're not able to put some of that stuff to the back of your mind and then just enjoy actually writing the story, being in there with the characters, doing the world building, all of that stuff. If you don't enjoy the process anymore, it can start to feel like a challenge and it can start to feel difficult, especially with traditional publishing where, as a fantasy author, I'm usually expected to produce a book a year. Obviously, there are some authors that don't do that. They take as long as they need for a series, and then it comes out, and then 1 book a year will still follow. An example will be Joe Abercrombie. He will take 2, 3, 4, 5 years out to write the entirety of the trilogy, the first draft of each book, get them to a stage that he's happy with. However, the publisher will then say, right, we're going to launch book 1 on this date, and the following year he will have to launch book 2, and the following year book 3, so that momentum builds, so that readers know about the new series, so that they get excited, and that the books will, hopefully the sales will continue throughout the series. So even he has to do that. Once you kind of push the button, once you say we're launching book 1, you know that a year out book 2 is coming and a year out book 3. The publisher will then get all these other things in line, the copy editor, the proofreader, working on the covers, doing the promotion, doing the PR, doing all these things that I've talked about in the build-up to the launch of the Judas Blossom that I have to work on. They have to then get involved, going to events, going on tour around the country, doing signings. All these things have to then start slotting in. So contracts are important and deadlines are important. Taking as long as you want between series, potentially, if you're able to do that, then that's great. It depends. If your first series does well, your first book even, and the publisher says, that's good, we want to capitalize on your success, can you deliver a new book in a new series, a standalone, for a year's time? And if you say no, there again, some people can end up being a kind of one-hit wonder. The book comes out, it does well, and think, all right, yeah, I'd like to follow this new author, and then nothing happens for 5 years. that can kind of damage the momentum because there are so many distractions. Readers could just forget about you. Some may be delighted and come back and rediscover you. Some will be waiting eagerly and will happily wait for those 5 years. But for most of us who live in this kind of mid-list space, it's building up a body of work. It's building momentum and gradually growing your audience. And you do that by putting out books regularly. So it's an important consideration if you're going to go down the traditional publishing route, that you will have to produce books regularly of a certain quality. And it's also true in self-publishing. Self-published authors will put out 2, 3, 4 books a year, because there again, the audience are hungry for their work. They're expecting you to produce a certain number of books per year and finish out a series or do more in this series or whatever it might be. So it is a business. You have to kind of remember that. This is the weird thing, that writing books is just based purely on imagination in terms of fiction. It's just your ideas onto the page and made real. But it's also a business at the end of the day. The publishers have to make money. They have to sell the books so they can pay everybody and pay you, and you all make a profit, and then hopefully the money funds you to go on and write more books. That's the goal. That's the kind of objective for me, is to be able to write full time. So it is a business based purely on ideas and imagination. And having that business awareness, I think some authors lack it, or they just haven't fully grasped it. Even more so, as I said, with self-publishing, because you run all of the business side yourself. You're not handing it off to someone else and they take care of it and come back to you. You are working with the editor, you're working with the cover designer, you're working with a proofreader, you're doing all the promotion yourself. So it can be a challenge for some writers to understand that. So it's not a case of you can take however long you need to write a good book. For that first book, yeah, sure. The books thereafter, you're going to have to produce them to some kind of a deadline, whichever route you go down. The next question was sent in was, what does the revision and editing process look like for me? I think I've touched on this a little bit in some of the other videos, so I won't go over it in too much detail, but there's the standard editing process that I go through as part of traditional publishing with my publisher. So I will get a detailed letter back with edits from my editor on the sort of draft that I've sent her, and I'll work through that. Then it'll go to a copy editor, someone who has not read the book before. They'll go through, offer their advice, their notes, but also sanity check it for any inconsistencies, like their eyes are blue and in this chapter their eyes are green, or I don't understand this, I don't get what you're trying to communicate here. And as a new reader, someone who's never read the book before, that's kind of an important thing to look at. Then it'll go to the proofread stage, where that's the final kind of punctuation and grammar only, minor changes on the page of how it'll look. Then the arcs will come out, and then the book will come out. My own internal kind of revising and editing is, I plan all my books. I'm a fairly detailed planner, not everything down to the nth degree, but I know the beginning, the middle, the end, milestones. I know roughly what has to happen in every chapter, but sometimes the kind of creative jumps come between those milestones and I don't know what's going to happen, and great and interesting and cool things come out of that. In terms of editing, once that first draft is done, I'll then go back and look at various things. I'll do a dialogue pass. I'll do a character analysis pass. So I'll look at the arc of the character and say, has it developed how I originally planned? Is this person as forthright? Is this person, is there a coward? Are they showing signs of that? Do we progress? Do they change? Do they evolve? Do they devolve? Does a character go away from what someone might anticipate, go down a dark path? Do they rise to the challenge? Whatever it might be that I've had in my head, I then need to see if I've executed it in the way that I want on the page. Readers will have their own views and opinions on the characters, and I wish we'd seen more of this, I wish we'd seen more of that, or I like this character, I don't like that character. All of that is beyond my control and I don't know it. It's more a case of, is the vision of the book that I had planned and had kind of in my head, is it where it should be on the page? Am I happy with it? Do I think it needs major changes? So I'll look at different things. Character, world building, I'll sometimes go through it and say, this isn't explained enough, this has too much, this is slowing the pace down. So world building pass, character pass, dialogue pass, pacing pass. Sometimes my editor will come to me and say, this kind of goes on a bit too long, the rest of the book flows really well, Can you put some of the information in other places? So I'll now do a kind of pacing pass myself before it gets to my editor. And I'll, rather than try and do all of these things at once, that would be a really slow thing. I'll focus on one element and run through the whole book, and then do something else and run through the whole book. Sometimes I'll just pick one character and just do their chapters to try and get the arc, as if it was just their story, and read it through and say, right, this isn't quite right, I need to work on this. And then I'll do the next character and the next character, because all of my books typically have more than one point of view. Getting the balance right between characters. Sometimes you have main characters and minor characters, and I'm thinking, oh, there's not enough on this character. Even though they're a minor character, I don't feel like we've given them enough, screen time. Can I put a bit more in this? Can I put them in the background of another chapter? Can I introduce them as a second point of view where someone's talking to them? And so it's things like that. And it's all these things that you carry around, and there's the impression of what you've got. And it isn't until you hand off that book to someone else who's never read it and you read it for the first time that you then get even more useful feedback, because there's what I think this is working and this makes sense. I think it's all okay. Then you give it to someone else and they say, I just don't get it. Obviously, it has to be, try that again. Obviously, it has to be someone that you trust, a friend, family member, writing group, or in this case, my agent or my editor, whose perspective and knowledge, and I trust their opinion. When they say, I don't get it, I know where they're coming from. Or they won't just say, I don't get it. They'll explain and say, are you trying to do this or that? They ask questions, and questions are really useful, because then you can say, oh, right, I was trying to do this and they've said they don't understand this, or you already said this somewhere else. Right, I don't need to repeat it. And sometimes I fear that if I don't explain some things enough, the readers won't get it. Sometimes I put too much in, I have to strip it back. And so it's all that kind of balancing act. But getting feedback from other people is so, so important. It's just necessary in whatever kind of book you're writing and whatever genre you're writing. You must get feedback from other people. The other thing I do once I finish that first draft is let the book rest, almost like a cake or some bread. You write it and then you walk away and you leave it alone for a couple of weeks if you can, and do nothing on it. You can think about it and you'll be planning things and write down notes and stuff, but don't touch it. You need that time to have it out of your head, to give yourself a little bit of mental distance, so that when you come back to it, it's not with fresh eyes, but you have a little bit of a different perspective. You're not as deep within it as when you're working on it every single day, or as often as you do work on it, and it's just constantly swirling in my brain, one book. I only ever work on one book at once because I'm so focused on it. I'm so kind of just tunnel vision on that book. And then I need to step back. I need to have a break, clear my head, go and do something that's not writing, recharge the batteries, come back, and then try and look at it with a slightly different view and say, right, now start doing all these revisions. Now read the whole book through. Look at different aspects, and then get to a certain stage where I think it's ready, then I hand it off, and then we go through the process several times again. And I know errors slip through in books with spelling and punctuation and typos, but it always amazes me that people say, oh, I haven't edited this book. Every single traditionally published book is edited so many times, and eventually I've read a book 20, 30 times, I become word blind, and I rely on other people to help me find these mistakes, and even then sometimes they miss them, because there's human error. So we can fix them in future revisions or ebooks or whatever it might be. But it's just the nature of the beast. We're not machines. We're not going to get AI books. That's not going to be a thing. Whatever, despite what some people seem to think they're going to take over, they're not. They're just not. It's ridiculous. So yeah, that's my loose kind of rough notes on my editing process. There's other bits I've probably forgotten that I do without thinking. But that's kind of it. So the Judas Blossom is out on the 11th of July. The Judas Blossom is out on the 11th of July. Go and pre-order it now. There are links down below to Amazon, Waterstones, Barnes & Noble, Indigo. You can get signed and personalised copies if you're in the UK from a link down below as well. Check that out. That would be great. I'm probably going to take a little bit of a break, maybe a week or two in July with the launch of the book and everything else that's going to be going on. But I will be back in maybe 2 or 3 weeks' time with some new videos. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today, and I'll see you very soon.